I've had at least 7 or 8 days I've woken up and think, I'm getting ready to go into work today. It's like, there's that tweet. I don't have a job. And so that is hard. But I think ultimately we need to stand by the courage of our convictions. And so that's what I have done. I believe that's what more Christians need to do. And I've been so encouraged to hear so many Christians contact me and say, wow, because of your stand, I'm doing this, or I've decided to do that, or I've decided to stop doing that.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. Great to be back for another fantastic week of hearing stuff that stirs our faith, that challenges us and our thinking. If you're new to Inspired, we are relentlessly bombarded with bad news and fear in the media, and this just counteracts that as I get different mates from totally different walks of life who come on and share their journey and what God's done in and through them. And I have no doubt this week you're going to be inspired, stirred, challenged in your thinking, because we've got with us Aaron Edwards. Welcome, Aaron.
Hello, Simon. Good to be with you.
Yeah, fantastic to have you. So, Aaron, maybe our paths first crossed through New Day, a conference there for New Frontiers Youth, maybe a decade or so ago. And I've tracked with Aaron in the last few years because he runs a podcast with his mate Andy Bannister, which is called Pod of the Gaps. And I would recommend that, guys, to you because it's brilliant. It seeks to plug the gaps between the church and culture. As you'll hear, he's a very, very clear thinker. And it's come much to the forefront recently because of being cancelled. And most people get cancelled by, I suppose, people on the other side. But it's tricky when you're cancelled by your own team, isn't it, Aaron? We'll come to that in due course. But listen, enough of intro. Let's just get straight into it. I know you've got a really beautiful and interesting sort of whole family conversion story. So go back and tell us about your childhood. And over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Simon. And so when I was brought up in a Roman Catholic context, really, went to Roman Catholic school, we were kind of nominally Catholic. I don't think I would have called myself a Christian. And my parents got divorced when I was about 7, and then we stopped going to church after that. But my whole impression of Christianity was through a kind of high liturgy and things that I couldn't really get on board with, and I had a memory just of trying to play with wrestling figures in the pews and getting told off for being too loud. That's kind of my memory of Catholic Church growing up. So we had that all in the atmosphere. So I guess I would have vaguely believed in God in some way. It had no impact on my life at all, and it showed me that it didn't matter that much once we stopped going to church. When I was a teenager, when I was a young teenager, I was 12. My older sister, basically overnight, she got seemed to have a cold or a flu, but she actually had meningitis of a very rare, terrible strain, and she died within a day, which completely rocked our whole family. So if you imagine your sister's there, just got a cold, and then the next day she's in hospital, and then she's just gone, and that completely destroyed us in so many ways. You know, I was one of 5, so now one of 4. And it had a huge impact on our family in various ways. And unbeknownst to us, the impact it had on my dad was more profound than we realised. He was a very strong rock for us at that time, didn't show any sort of massive amount of mourning, but he dealt with it quite badly on his own. And we didn't realise that when we were visiting him in the weekends, me and my siblings, in the weekdays, he'd actually been on cocaine and been going on binges and all sorts of things, just kind of cleaning himself up for the weekend and getting himself good and proper. And that went on for a few years. It was just really difficult for him. One day, one of these binges he woke up in his chair in the lounge and turned on the TV. We still kind of hung over, and the God channel came on, as it tends to do. He doesn't know why. He couldn't find the Sky remote. So he turned on the TV, couldn't find the remote that actually changed the channel. And so he just watched it, and it woke him up to something that they were talking about, biblical prophecy. And it reminded him of something that happened 30 years earlier when he was working as a waiter in a hotel in Jersey, the island of Jersey, the Channel Island. And he'd been kind of sucking up to this party of chaplains all week, because obviously in the kind of services industry, sometimes people are just feigning interest. Not all of them, I'm sure, but he certainly was. Whoever the guests were, he was interested in whatever they were interested in. So this guy was interested in biblical prophecy. So all week my dad was like, oh, interesting. Tell me more. And at the end of the week, the guy gives him this book and says, I think you'll find what you're looking for in here. And at the end of the week, he rifles through the book back in his room, and thinking it's kind of a big note, banknote, and he doesn't want to embarrass him in front of his colleagues. And really, there was nothing in it. It was just literally the book. He wanted him to read this book. He's like, oh dear, what a waste of a week of sucking up. And and what happened was, in the end, he did read the book, and it planted this seed in him about the Bible has something to say about prophecy. And he occasionally used to mention this to us when we were children, even when none of us were practicing Christians, really. There was this thing that he cared about the Bible having something to say about it. So this God TV thing that he woke up to hungover was all about this exact topic. And so he rang the number at the end of the program. He went on an Alpha course which was run at the local New Frontiers church in Brighton. And then he kind of, on his own, quietly became a Christian without telling us.
Wow.
And then eventually he did tell us. And then he told us, well, I've become a born again Christian. And I kind of thought, we were just like, oh dear, Dad's joined a cult. What an unfortunate thing to happen to us as we're teenagers. By that point, I was 15, so I just thought, oh dear, this is a strange thing. Dad's gone religious. But we kind of noticed an amazing impact in his life. We saw, we saw his habits change. We saw his irritability shift, and he became very joyful and peaceful. We genuinely saw the fruit, what we now understand as the fruit of the Spirit in his life.
Yeah.
Even though it was kind of weird to know that your dad was going to this big happy clappy church where they raise their hands and speak in tongues and hear prophecies, this kind of thing. So we kind of said, he brought us along with him when we visited at the weekends. He wasn't too pushy, but he was still very evangelistic about it. And we did say eventually, look, Dad, we think this is great for you. But it's getting hard to explain to our teenage friends at school what we're doing on a Sunday and why we can't go to this or that thing, because we're going to our dad's 2-hour-long tongue-speaking happy clappy service. And so is it okay if we don't go? He said, don't worry, please. I don't want to put pressure on you. But so you don't have to go to the church again with me. But now your mum's in Portugal for this 1 week in July, and so you have to stay with me. And I happen to be going to this thing called Stoneleigh Bible Week, and I was like, oh, okay, why doesn't that surprise me on that particular week of all weeks? And I said, can't I just stay at home? I'm 15. He said, no, well, technically by law you have to have parental supervision, so you have to come with me, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry. I wish it could be any other way, And so he drags me and my 2 younger siblings along, kind of kicking and screaming ish, but he says, don't worry, you don't have to go to any of the meetings, don't go to any of the Jesus stuff if you don't want to. Just go to the cafes. They've got football, they've got badminton, they've got cafes to hang out in. And we're like, okay, we'll just do that. So we said as a pact, the 3 of us made a pact, and we said, we won't let the Christians get to us. We do all the kind of fun stuff. We just keep it unchristian, guys. Come on, we can do it. We literally did that. We agreed on the way there. That's what we were going to do. And then basically within the first day, we all got split up. My younger brother and sister, who were twins, who were 2 years younger, they met with the kind of people in the church who were their age, and I met with some of the people my age. And then that was it. I didn't see them for the rest of the whole week. Just assumed that they were holding to the pact as tightly as I was planning to. And we were throughout the course of the week, I was just kind of blown away by the love that I saw between these fellow teenagers. I'd never seen it before. I would have considered myself quite happy at school and popular, but with loads of friends. But I didn't see the kind of level of friendship I saw here. Genuinely, like the love of the Spirit at work in these people who really cared for each other, went out of their way. And they were also cool people, quite down to earth. They liked normal things. They weren't kind of complete crazy Ned Flanders types. And so I was just kind of like, wow, this is amazing. I want to be with these people. This is amazing. And I went to a few of the meetings with them. But at the same time, I didn't want to make a big change. I was being a real coward about it, really. I just thought, maybe I can have my foot in both camps. I like these friends. I'll keep these friends, and I'll go back to my other life when I go home and carry on getting drunk with my friends and whatever, doing weed and things like that. And it was a real tension for me whenever I went to a meeting and heard them do a gospel appeal or something. I'd kind of think, oh, let me just put this off. And I managed to get to the end of the week and not become a Christian, which I think I was quite proud of, actually. Mm-hmm. And my dad came to me on the last day of this Bible week and said, just so you know, some of the guys that you're staying with are staying for another week on their own for the second week of the conference to work for free in the tent shop. Do you want to do that? They're serving in the tent shop. And you're to a non-Christian teenager, the idea of serve. What do you mean serve? Does that mean that just means work without getting paid, doesn't it? It's like, yes, I guess it does mean that, right? And so it's like, well, why would I want to do that? Because next week's my 16th birthday. So all of my friends in year 11 have had these like lock-in parties where everyone's gotten drunk. And if I say I'm not doing that like you all did because I went to a Bible week with my crazy religious dad, that's going to be a bit weird, isn't it? So I can't do that. I said, so sorry, Dad, I can't do it. So he said, don't worry, no pressure. I'm just packing the car. So I just thought I'd let you know. So I said, no, I'm not going to do it, but thanks for the offer. I then literally don't have a memory of what happened next. I found myself walking from the football field to the sign-up queue with these guys that I'd gotten to know. I probably was just chatting with them, and I just found myself in the queue with them, going forward and filling my name and details in. And I have a vivid memory of filling the form in, going, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing.
Wow.
Well, I thought I wasn't wanting to do this. And then there's a stronger part within me going, this is where you need to be. This is where you have to be next week. And so I found myself doing that, missing my 16th birthday, which was a revelation to my dad. By the way, he didn't have any qualms about being without parental supervision that following week before the 16th birthday. But let's, leave that one. He's like, oh, that's fine. All these people are very responsible. Oh, okay, I see. So I stayed the second week on my own, working in the tent shop, and still not a Christian, and still going to the meetings, still getting deeper kind of revelation of various things from the Bible, and hearing the implications of the gospel, and seeing these friends looking out for me. They threw me a surprise 16th birthday, which was really kind of them, which was really lovely. And so I still managed to get to the end of it thinking, this is my strategy. This is definitely true. I can't deny it. Jesus is God, and he rose from the dead. All this stuff is real. I can see the impact of the Holy Spirit in people's lives. But let me just keep it on ice for like another 45 years or so. And I'll sort of wait until I've had a fun life in the world. And then I'll come back and, have this official good life later on. That was my plan. I got home, still hadn't kind of made a commitment. But you can imagine my dad is raving to everyone. I took him there, didn't even want to come, and he stayed on his own. I was like, shut up, Dad. And he said, come along to church one more time, and we're going to share, everyone's sharing testimonies about Stoneleigh. So you were at Stoneleigh, so come and listen to some of the stories. I was like, okay, I'll go along. And I'm sat there, and he says, why don't you go up to the microphone and tell them that you stayed another week? It's like, what, are you kidding me? I'm not a Christian. Why would I go and do that? He's like, oh, okay. And then he just gets up himself and goes, and I try to pull him back from the rows, and he's off. He's up to the mic. He's up there to share the story. And as he's saying it, he says, I became a Christian a year ago on the Alpha course. All this stuff's happened in my life. I've been praying for my family, for my children. And, my two youngest both became Christians at Stoneleigh. And then I'm looking along the row going, you guys broke the pact. You didn't even tell me. I can't believe it. This is a travesty, an outrage. I was there as a Trojan horse at the second week there, but I didn't cave, guys, And so they're just kind of sheepishly, yeah, sorry, we became Christians. Okay, great. So there's me left on my own, and then he says, my other son isn't quite over the line yet, but he's there, and God's working in his life. And all these guys who I got to know were sitting on the other side of the room. And then the next worship song comes on later in the meeting. They came over to me and said, oh, we didn't actually realize you weren't a Christian. You hid that pretty well. I was like, thank you very much. And they said, do you want to go outside for a chat? It's almost like mafia style or something. Do you want to go outside for a chat into the corridor? So I come out to the chat, and I tell them, look, they said, what's going on? So why aren't you a Christian? What's stopping you? I said, I think I want to do one of those Alpha courses I've heard so much about, those kind of 10, 12 week sprawling, putting off the decision longer kind of thing. I didn't put it like that, but kind of that was in my head. How can I delay this decision longer and make sure I get it absolutely perfect? They just said, no, you don't need to do that. Like, they were actively putting me off doing Alpha, which is a great, a hilarious, counterintuitive evangelism. Don't do Alpha. They said, because they knew that was me just saying it for the sake of it. And so I ended up, they said, look, let's just pray about it. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll pray about whether or not I do Alpha. That's fine. That's what I'm in my head, what's going on. So they start praying the sinner's prayer. And just like when I'm filling in the form to stay a second week, I find myself praying the sinner's prayer after them, which I didn't intend to do. I didn't really plan out praying it, wanting to do that. And then as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, but I do want to do this. I actually do want to do this. This is like, there's something more fundamental that's drawing me here. God is drawing me to him. And that was it. So I kind of accidentally became a Christian, and it kind of never looked back, really.
Wow, fascinating. And
it's kind of amazing.
And then did your whole family come through to faith?
Yeah, so what happened then is my older brother, who at that point was on drugs in Ibiza, a rapper, kind of a drum and bass rapper. That's the kind of rapping you can't actually hear the lyrics of. When I was a younger teenager, I used to type his lyrics up for him, which were like atrociously reprobate lyrics that I was typing up on a laptop for him or something. And he was really hard to tell. My cool older brother, 5 years old, he used to kind of smuggle me into clubs when I was 15. It was hard to tell him. When he came back from his latest, jaunt in Ibiza, he's like, "What's this I heard about you becoming some kind of Christian?" It's like, "Well, yeah, sorry." And so I let the side down. But they did it first. The younger ones did it first. They broke the pact first. But eventually he has an amazing story all on his own. He kind of went to a healing meeting by a guy called Rambabu, held at CCK at the time, now Emmanuel Church in Brighton. And he was deaf in his left ear, my brother, from the age of 12, from going to raves and standing, I think, too close to loudspeakers. And the guy kind of laid his hands on him. He kind of shot to the ground and got healed. And I didn't even know he'd be at this meeting. He just turned up on the other side of the room. I was like, wow, Mark's here, amazing. He got healed, and then Mark's been 100 miles an hour evangelist ever since. He's now a gospel rapper called MC Tempo. You can go and look him up. He's got some great stuff. So his lyrics certainly changed significantly from the ones I remember typing up back in the day. So that was amazing. So all through this seed that was planted by this chaplain, in the 70s in Jersey. And the amazing thing is, when my dad shared his baptism testimony at the church, someone in the audience said, "I think that guy he's being talked about is my uncle." And they found a way to connect them together. So they said to my dad, do you want to go and meet him? Yeah, absolutely. He was down, I think, working in Plymouth at the time as a prison chaplain, and he was on the verge of giving up the ministry because he was so discouraged by a lack of fruit. Yeah. And then my dad comes along and says, in like 30 years ago, you planted the seed, and this is where it's gone. All of my children have become Christians. I also sent a tract to my brother. He became a Christian. My brother evangelized to his neighbors. They all become Christians in this bizarre time of kind of conflagration of fruitfulness. It was amazing. And this guy was just so encouraged and inspired. And it's just amazing how God works in the sense of his providence, which we don't know about. So it's kind of a wonderful example of how God works even without our plans and without us even intending stuff to happen.
Yeah, so encouraging. And you basically, having been reticent with your brother maybe in saying, in nailing your colours to the mast, and subsequently you have been just bold. You've had a heart for evangelism, haven't you, since then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess that's quite common with someone when you become a Christian from a non-Christian background. Though I don't want to disparage those who've been brought up in Christian households. We now, we want to raise our children absolutely that way. And I think I missed out on a lot by not being raised in a Christian household. But I guess what you do have is that big sense of a contrast. You go, why would I want to return to the world? And why would I not want to save people from it? Yeah, so very early on, I was doing street evangelism with my friends, some of which I was less proud of than others, and some of the tracts I used to give out. But the heart was there to really reach people, and I've always been encouraged by what God can do, even through means that we don't always think are ideal or perfect. I think the willingness, the heart, and the courage to go and step out for him in faith is something I've always emphasized, and it's continued really into my own teaching and theology. When I've written and spoken about evangelism and mission in different contexts, it's courage and boldness that I think are especially important. So that carried on, I guess, when I went to university, and I had some various sort of experience of overseas mission trips in different contexts, just short-term ones, which are really encouraging for faith and for building connections with people, but also just seeing how God is at work in so many amazing different ways. But then when I was at university, I was quite involved in the Christian Union and ended up being the president of that. And we did all sorts of fun stuff for mission weeks. And I was quite keen not to do the normal stuff that CUs tend to do, which is just the kind of lunch bar talks where someone comes along and you have hardly anyone turning up, unless Simon Gilbo's there, in which case it's kind of packed to the rafters. How can I get in? Banging at the door. Is he really here? Is he here in the flesh? But like so often, I observing there's a kind of formula of the way that sort of evangelism worked that I was kind of not particularly happy with. We used to do some quite fun interactive stuff with people on campus. So we got quite a good reputation with a lot of the non-Christian students on the campus, and a bad reputation with the student union who didn't like
where was this?
That we were. This was at Chester Christian Union. Mm-hmm. So we that was quite a fun time. But then I also had some experience of street preaching after that. We were in a friend and I, because Chester where we were is a very pedestrianised city, beautiful city, and there were quite a few street preachers, like more than the average amount, it seemed, for that kind of area. And you had a real range of people who were just out there to kind of tell everyone they're horrible sinners and nothing else, seemingly, and seemed very angry. And I used to walk past with my non-Christian housemates that I used to evangelize to, and I was really good friends with, still in contact with most of them now. And they would say to me, like, "Oh, Aaron, is that that's not your kind of Christianity, is it?" Talking to about any of the street preachers. And I said, "Oh, no, not me. I'm the kind of cool Christian. I'm the culturally appropriate Christian who says the right things. I just like the same stuff as you guys. I just love Jesus as well. Let me invite you along to the CU or to church, etc." And then I kind of really felt convicted by God about that I was separating myself from these people who are doing stuff that I might tweak how they do it, but actually what their willingness to do that is something that I needed to step out in even more. Though I'd had some experience of that previously, I really needed to, just even in my own faith, I felt God challenged me. So my friends and I, we talked about this and said, how would we do street preaching in a way that we think is more culturally appropriate, but actually still is really, really going out on a limb and challenging people. And so we started this thing. We used to wear these T-shirts that said, "Just ignore me," on them, because we kind of wanted to emphasize that we know that this is kind of inappropriate. I don't like people preaching when I'm walking through the town. It's not really what I'm there for. But we mixed in a bit of drama, but we still properly did preaching. We didn't just do a drama to distract and make it just a nice, easygoing thing. And so and then we tag teamed it. We did some skits and we did some stuff, and it got quite a following. It was quite fun to do it. And we got quite a few people coming up to us. We got 15-year-olds from a council estates coming saying, "How do I become a preacher?" And we were like, "Well, I think you could become a Christian first, and then we'll talk about." But they were like, they'd never seen people of our age kind of there who want to relate to them, but who are so zealous to actually preach the message. So we got obviously a lot of flack, but the most of the flack we got was from Christians rather than non-Christians. And so that was the kind of so various things like that God has brought me through various sort of hurdles and obstacles and teaching me stuff along the way, really.
And then you felt you talk about a reluctant call into academia. Go on.
Yeah. So with all of that, I was keen to just carry on doing evangelism and serving the church and this kind of thing. And I did have this kind of yearning to write a book about something that I felt was the very moment I became a Christian. I kept hearing preaching about the tensions within the Bible, and I knew that it was something that very early on I just sensed God wanted me to write about it. I didn't know in what forum. And then as I did a degree, and I did a couple of master's degrees as I was there, sensing that God wanted me to write in some way, but not quite sure why. I didn't really want to do theology per se. And then I ended up doing that as a PhD, which was just really surprising to me because it wasn't something I wanted to. I really didn't have I sort of despised a lot of academia in many ways because it seemed so esoteric, which is an ironic word because people don't always know what it means. It does mean kind of cut off. It means something in its own world, like in an ivory tower, not related to reality. And these journal articles that no one can understand, and kind of ego-driven superiority issues, that kind of thing. So I didn't like the idea of academia, but God called me into it reluctantly. And I felt the call to be a kind of witness within it. So I would go to conferences where there's all these raving liberals who were tearing the Bible apart. And I would just say the awkward thing in the room, is ask an awkward question or challenge some narrative that everyone else seems to agree with, which I can't believe they agree with, etc. So that kind of felt like something that was my calling for certainly for a time.
And you had an extraordinary provision, didn't you, for that in Aberdeen?
Yeah, so I started the PhD at Chester, and I was working at Costa part-time in order to fund it. I was working like probably more hours than I was allowed to work there. And in fact, my wife and I, when we got married, we were working at the same retail park. She was working at Toys R Us and I was working at Costa, and she could see me sweeping the floors in the evening on an evening shift. We could wave to each other from across the retail park. Very romantic urban story there. And I was having to fit all of my reading in and around my shift. So I'd come in like 3 hours early, sit there with 3 coffees and read, and then do the 8-hour shift, and then sit at the desk at the table afterwards and carry on. It was kind of challenging to do, but it was fun as well. And then out of nowhere, I felt God calling me to go to Aberdeen. I'd started my PhD, and it didn't make any sense to me at all. And Molly was pregnant with our first, so why would we leave? We've got a really good setup. The street preaching ministry is just taking off after a challenge to get people on board with it. Why would we just go and move to the cold northeast of Scotland? It just doesn't make any sense. But literally, it's one of those stories where everything turned to Aberdeen for about 2 weeks. Like everyone came and randomly spoke to me who didn't know about it. And I just thought, this is just really weird. I need some headspace. We need to kind of just pray about this. Maybe there's some future call to Aberdeen. And we went to visit my wife's parents in Norfolk and to stay with her grandpa, who was he basically lived in his chair in the lounge, surrounded by books for the 1960s and previously, because he was a teacher, and he just in his younger years, and so he was just there, surrounded by carers. Often he was very, very old, very ill, but he still remembered just enough little tidbits about his faith here and there, and he remembers a snippet of a sermon that he used to preach when he was able to preach when he was younger. And whenever you asked him a question about his faith, if he didn't know the answer, he would just go back into this sermon. We heard it about 8 or 9 times every time we visited. It was quite amusing, really. And so he'd be like in his kind of Norfolk accent, and we go, "So Grandpa, so what we talked about earlier today in the Bible, we talked about we're not justified by works, but by what?" And he goes, "Ooh, you got me there." And he go, "God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself. And there's a lot in that," and they kind of elaborate on whatever he used to say. So it was this 2 Corinthians 5 thing. God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself. Now, throughout that week, whenever we visited, because he had so many interesting books around him, I'd always take 3 or 4 off the shelf and read through them while I was there and just pop in and out of them. Old missionary books or whatever they were. And of all of these books I read this week, most of them, it transpired, the author was from Aberdeen, or Aberdeen featured in it. And I was like, by this point, I was like, this is ridiculous. This is just so silly. And the most hilarious one was John Wesley's journal. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. And I read up John Wesley. I thought, oh, John Wesley, did he preach in Chester, I wonder, where we did street preaching? So I looked up Chester. And he's in Chester, he's talking about it in his diary. I think it's an abridged version of the diary. And he says, we were here, we got egged and we got rats thrown at us or whatever, which is quite common for what happened back then in the 1700s. I didn't get any rats thrown at me. Then he says, and then we tried to get a boat to the Isle of Man, but it was too stormy. So we went from Chester, we went to Aberdeen. And I was like, you are kidding. And he says, when it was at Aberdeen, I walked around the theology department. The quadrangle reminded me at King's College. It reminded me of my time at Oxford. And then some women came up to me out of nowhere and said, "Oh, Mr. Wesley, we missed your sermon at the chapel the other day. Could you give us a sermon now?" Like, that just used to happen to Wesley all the time. Could you just give us a sermon? So, okay. Do I have one in my back pocket? So he said, he's writing this in his journal. I didn't know what to preach on, but immediately I felt that the text come to me. God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself. Yeah. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, this is just absolutely ridiculous how much God is wanting us to get this message. And so we came back we went to Norfolk for that trip, thinking when we go home, we'll have to tell our elders at the church, maybe there's something to pray about for a future call to go to Aberdeen. I just came back and was like, I think we just have to tell the elders we're going to Aberdeen. Yeah. Please, can you pray for us as we go? And thankfully, everyone's very supportive. Though it was really difficult to kind of up sticks and leave and go to a whole new place, whole new community, whole new country, really. And with Molly pregnant, it was, in God's blessing, it was amazing. And actually, strangely, all I did was I sent an email and they said, I said, how do you transfer a PhD? They said, well, today, if you want to do it, today is the deadline. I was like, really? Wow. Okay. So you've got to get your references in. I was like, oh my gosh. So I just used my old references for my MA, which don't really count for PhD, but fine. Chucked it all in. I kind of thought, if this doesn't work, great. I get to stay where I am and it's quite comfortable. I enjoy being where I am. So if God, maybe it's just a crazy coincidences that all happened. And so I sent it all in, first draft of a statement, etc. These things normally take a long time to craft. And a month later, I get a guy in church comes up to me, a very prophetic guy, and says, as we're talking about anything over coffee, just the non-spiritual things, and he says, "Oh, God's just told me something about you." It's like, "Oh yeah, what's that?" He said, "He's going to supply your every need." I was like, did he say where that was going to be, or no? Okay, no. Okay, so it's just literally like, it just sounded like a very generic Mystic Meg kind of prophecy. And I was like, okay, if you've got anything more specific, then God is going to provide for you. But it's great that he is. And then a couple of days later, I get the email back from Aberdeen saying, "Congratulations, you've been accepted." I was kind of like, oh, by that point, I was kind of getting cold feet, thinking, I kind of hoped I'd been rejected. But you've been accepted, and well done on winning the Arts and Humanities Research Council grant, the doctoral award. I was like, what do you mean the doctoral award? I didn't enter any doctoral award. And I don't know what happened to this day, whether the application accidentally got entered into some grant fund, or whether someone else got given a grant that they didn't want, and then the university had to find someone, and my application happened to come in. But rather than paying to do my PhD, which is what I was doing at Chester, working at Costa, I got paid to do my PhD, which is basically
Brilliant.
unheard of for theology. Theologians never really get that, because it's usually for something that the world values a bit more than theology. So it was just astonishing, really.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And he has continued to provide miraculously. We're going to come to that. So you end up, you get your PhD, you end up in a role as a MA mission program lead at Cliff College. You spent, about 7 years there? Tell us about that, about the journey.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, so I worked actually at the University of Aberdeen for 1 year after I finished the PhD as a teaching fellow, teaching on religion and culture and crisis, that kind of stuff, which was really interesting, a mixture of Christian and non-Christian students. And then a permanent position at Cliff College, 2016, running, teaching on evangelism and mission mainly, but also other theological and philosophical topics, quite a range of stuff that I was teaching and in charge of, really. And that was great, really fun. The history of the college is fantastic. It's Wesleyan. So it's, it linked in really with that call, using Wesley to get me to Aberdeen in the first place. I just had a great time with the students. It was something that I could see kind of lights going on in some of those who were, and strengthening those who were already coming with something about them. And there were others who needed a bit more TLC, or needed to deconstruct some of the things that they came in with. So that was it. You always have a mix of students, but it was labouring away, really trying to maintain the college's evangelical convictions, really, which I think were fantastic historically. There was a guy called Samuel Chadwick who really set the culture and the tone of that, and he's influenced a lot of people over the years who harken back to his legacy. They used to send out bands of evangelists from the college, and so I just kept speaking about that and saying, this is what we need to get back to. And I think over time it was clear that though there were some elements where the college was willing to do that and still talk about evangelism and do some evangelistic things, actually that radical biblical heart of the college had already been changing for years. And really I was swimming against the stream, and we had some evangelicals come in and others and try to have good influence alongside what we saw going on. But really that kind of heart of faith and willingness to stand on the word of God that had really characterized the college had started to wane over sort of 10 or 20 years, and we were fighting against it, really. So that was, I often found myself asking difficult questions after a few years, going, just trying to do it as well as possible, trying to be as helpful as possible, not and being for the college, being for the direction. But it was difficult because the issue was the college is linked into the British Methodism, and that's gone in a very different direction to where it was when Wesley set it up in the 1700s. So that's where we had a huge challenge, particularly on issues around gender and sexuality. So though there was already a bit of a drift at the college anyway, which I hope I did something to sort of challenge and to stand against in many ways and bring some foundations back in, which certainly some students would testify was the case. There was also during that time the challenge of Methodism encroaching further into the life of the college and vision of the college, and it became more and more difficult to resist some of that. So when Methodist Church voted on same-sex marriage to agree to have two equally applicable, equally valid views on marriage, one where you can marry someone of the same sex and God loves that and thinks it's great, And you can choose to disagree. You can just agree to disagree. God doesn't think that's great. And I was saying from the very beginning that I heard these proposals. We as a faculty commented on the extensive documents that came through to see how we would respond as a college. I was just saying, this isn't possible. It's not really going to be possible for someone to disagree vocally. All that's going to happen is the progressive view is going to be the dominant view, because the evangelical view might say, we're not going to persecute you for having it, but you probably will if they speak about it, I presume. And then it's like, oh, no, it's both views equally valid. This is a loving thing. God in love unites us was the name of the report. These reports always called something nice and vague about love. The Anglican one is living in love and faith. The Methodist one was God in love unites us. So nothing about homosexuality, nothing about the progressive incursion upon biblical evangelical faith. It's just generally love and unity. So if you're against it, you're against unity, you're against love, that kind of thing. So those are kind of the battles that are going on. But again, it was all done in I think a good spirit, and there were certainly times when I had more confidence that the college might have stood its ground on some of those issues a bit more strongly. And in the end, it didn't or couldn't, and it kind of entirely capitulated to the Methodist view. So therefore, the progressive view was then fully endorsed, and we immediately had students hanging rainbow flags out of their window, which shocked a lot of the older students, alumni who'd come and visit and say, I thought this was an evangelical college. Suddenly it's kind of really going hell for leather on pride stuff. And that now it becomes a kind of gospel issue. Like, if you really care about the love of God in the gospel, why wouldn't you be pro-pride? Those are the kind of debates. So the idea that you could stand up and say this is actually really wrong suddenly became unthinkable for many evangelicals. So again, the idea on paper would have been, you can hold the view, please, we're totally allowing you to hold the view, but really you can't express the view, is what I found. It's what I warned them would happen, and I didn't expect myself to be the example of showing that it was right.
Hi, folks. I hope 2024 has got off to a good start. I think most of you know this podcast comes out on the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, working in Burundi, which is still annoyingly the hungriest and poorest country in the world. And there are so many positives. I mean, I look back at the last year, see that we've impacted a couple of 100,000 people in a very meaningful way. I've got all these lovely photos of prostitutes that we've helped get out of prostitution, giving them a new skill as tailors. I think of street kids that we've helped get off the streets. Think of microfinance loans that we've given out to poorest of the poor people, mainly widows who have managed to start up businesses and are now thriving, being lifted out of poverty. Mud huts that have been able to knock down and build sort of brick houses with a tin roof and a door that can be locked to actually protect these vulnerable ladies. So many people have come into relationship with Jesus, come to faith. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. In that context, at the same time, there have been 40% food price rises of basic foodstuffs, and there have been 5 hikes in the last 3 months of fuel, which just adds up to crippling inflation that affects everybody. It's so challenging. So if you want to back us, if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate it, you sowing into the work. And that's so that you can go do that at greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. We'd love it for you to journey with us. greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. And keep enjoying the podcast. Now let's get back to it. So it was February 19th, 2023. Your world changed on the back of a tweet. Tell us that story.
Yes. Yeah. So, and the kind of local context to that was, immediate context was the Anglican same-sex blessings that happened. So though the Methodist debates had been happening, I'd been involved in those. I didn't go hell for leather publicly about it. I think when 2020 happened, lockdown happened, I noticed a problem in evangelical churches generally, which is probably why we started Pod of the Gaps, actually, the podcast you mentioned earlier. And I started a blog called That Good Fight, and I joined Twitter because I felt the need to speak publicly about these important issues that the church was suddenly sort of suspiciously not talking about, when they actually become these kind of what's known as culture war issues. We kind of get worried and think they're distractive to the gospel. And I kind of started to realize they're a huge part of our gospel witness in ways that we've not previously realized. So I started speaking about it. So for 2 years previously, I'd been quite vocal online, on Twitter, on the blog, on the podcast. And then February 19th, 2023, I posted homosexuality is invading the church. Evangelicals no longer see the severity of this because they're busy apologizing for their apparently barbaric homophobia, whether or not it's true. This is a gospel issue, by the way, because if sin is no longer sin, we no longer need a savior. And so that, for me, is especially in light of the Anglican context, when the national church in a nation decides to go down this route, and the evangelicals who ought to stand against it are more concerned that they'll be called homophobic, when I don't think most of the evangelical churches have been. They've been very respectful and accommodating and welcoming of people with same-sex attraction for years. So it's not an issue of homophobia, but they're worried about the fear of it, so they don't speak against it. Meanwhile, this thing is coming in, and it's sin. So for me, homosexuality is sin, and therefore it's not something that we should be tolerating, and certainly not welcoming or celebrating. But I felt like the voices had all gone silent, and I just felt the need to speak up about it. And then, yeah, I'd say all hell broke loose. And the Methodist progressives and atheist progressives jumped all over it, retweeted it, and called the college to comment on it, etc. And within a couple of hours, the college themselves had actually denounced the tweet without speaking to me. I was at church at the time, so I came back. It was a Sunday. It was a scheduled tweet that kind of came out. So it just kind of, you set up these tweets in advance and they come out on a certain time or a certain day. I come back from church in the afternoon and like 25,000 people have gone mad about the tweet. I then do some quick responses and go, well, here's where I clarify what I was saying. I'm not being homophobic. Here's why I don't think it's homophobic. Here's who I was addressing. I wasn't having a go at homosexuals. I wasn't saying that they are invading the church. I'm saying that homosexuality, which is a sin, is invading the church. That's unquestionable, and I stand by that, and I'm not apologizing or taking it down. But I said, hey, I don't want to bring the college into any, disrepute here. I want to say that's not what everyone believes in the college, and Cliff College is a place where people can respect and diversity of opinions. That's been my experience. I'm more conservative evangelical. It's an academic learning institution. You're supposed to have different views. That's kind of what makes an institution usually quite a helpful place to bat things around. So I tried to respond to those things as best I could, but it seems like the damage had already been done. I didn't quite realize how bad the damage had been done. But it was quite a stressful time, and it led to my immediate suspension. So the college just suspended me the next day. I said I'd love to talk about this, have a conversation, but because I didn't want to take the tweet down, I said I couldn't do that in good conscience. They suspended me immediately without conversation. They told me it was just going to be, it's an entirely dispassionate process. It's just a policy protocol. But then it led to a disciplinary hearing where, I gave what I thought was a good case to say this is what I believe. This is what I've actually written about in my academic research about speaking about this kind of thing. I've published stuff about this for years, so I don't really understand why this is so crazy and bizarre. I think you're reacting to a storm here. I think you're reacting to a public opinion drive and people with agendas who want to get me fired, which doesn't seem very fair. And I was eventually dismissed quite soon. So literally 2.5 weeks after the tweet, I was fired. And I'd never had a formal disciplinary warning even at my time. So I was just shocked, because I thought you had to go through a kind of lengthy process. Here's a warning, here's a written warning, a final written warning. Let's talk about this, and bat it out for a while. But it's just like gone within a few weeks, despite having been there for 7 years. So it was quite a stressful time for our whole family. But in the midst of it, God was very much at work as well, in ways that I've known him to be at the most difficult, trying times of life. So the evening of the tweet, I actually went to the prayer meeting at our church. I just felt like I was really excited to go to it, really. I was like, I need to go, so I just need to pray. And I just want to pray about something else, actually. I don't even want to think about this. This is quite a stressful scenario. And the theme of the prayer meeting was your work week. People like what kind of facing challenges at work, I think it was. That was the lead of the prayer meeting gave. I don't know if you're going to have a normal week this week or a challenging week. I was like, I think it's going to be the latter somehow. And a guy randomly at the end of the prayer meeting came up to me and said, Aaron, I just felt God over the last few days calling me to give you this word, a prophetic word, that he's going to provide for you and that your writing and speaking ministry is going to he's going to use you to have an impact upon the church. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. That's really encouraging. And I was thinking in my head, I don't know how that's going to happen right now, but okay. He said, I think you're going to write books and you're going to have an impact, greater impact. And here's some money. So God said to give you some money. And he gave me an envelope with about £300 in. It said, loved by God on it. And I said, thank you for this. This might come in handy, actually. I don't know. I presume you've heard about my situation today. He said, oh, no, I haven't heard. But what situation? It's like, there's a tweet. It's like, oh, I haven't got Twitter. Sorry, I don't follow Twitter. Like, okay, let me fill you in. And so it was amazing that this guy had already felt God speaking to him a few days before this had even happened, and is giving me this amazing encouragement, which I was able to, when I came home from the prayer meeting, to hand that envelope over to Molly to say, God's going to look after us. It's going to be okay. Like, it seems right now it's going to be scary and that everything's going to change, and I may lose my job, I may lose my reputation and my salary, and we may need to move out of this house. Who knows what will happen? But this is only £300. But God loves us. It says loved by God on it. We're loved. This is our seed. God is going to provide. And I was really, really confident in it. I was in tears, weeping on the way home from the prayer meeting, because I knew that it was stress. It's horrible knowing how many people think you're a horrible person, and everything you sort of built in your academic career is potentially up in flames because no one will trust you again and think you're a kind of crazy person who is not fitting as an academic or something. That was really difficult, but I just got this powerful sense that God is going to be with us. He's going to be in the darkest moments, as we all know. He is with us. He walks through the storm with us, and he has a plan to get us out of it somehow if we trust him. And so I knew that was going to happen. Those didn't stop the kind of heart palpitations and stress that I still went through, but it was, God was there with us.
Yeah. And I know you're not a hater, a bigot. I'm sure you've had loads of that kind of accusations pour at you. I mean, I presume you're not teaching your children, like we're not teaching our children to hate gays. We're taught to love everybody. I'm just putting my mind right now, and I'm sure plenty of people in the LGBTQ plus community will be listening to this right now. What would you say to them? I mean, you're our maxim is love, isn't it? You're not belittling love in those reports as the word. It's just how that manifests, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, exactly. I think it's not loving to affirm somebody who is going to say, think, do, live a life that may keep them separated from God, and that may keep them in the mire. You think of Psalm 40 and David saying that he's lifted me out of the miry bog and he's set my feet on a rock. He's made my steps secure. He's put a new song in my mouth. I want people who would call themselves same-sex attracted or gay or part of the LGBT community to know that. And I think it's wrong for them to say they have that when they don't. I think there's been all sorts of false religion since the beginning of time that will deceive people into thinking they're worshipping God. We have people worshipping Baal. We've had people worshipping false prophets and cults. And they'll feel certain things and feel a sense of community. And I do see the LGBT agenda in our society as something which is almost like a religion. And then I see, sadly, Christians who say, you can have all of it. You can have that new song in your mouth and just stay married just happen to be married to someone of the same sex. It doesn't make any difference. God's a God of love. So it's fine. But actually it's deceptive. It's not true. And the God of the Bible is the God who's revealed himself in Jesus Christ. And we must stick by that. And Jesus is the one who said, if you listen to my words and put them into practice, you'll build your house on a rock. And if you don't, if either you'll hear them and don't put them into practice, which is the thing what Methodism has done, or you choose to reject them entirely, don't hear them, you're going to be building a house on the sand. It may look fine for a while. You may feel like you've got this great community, but actually there's going to be a storm coming one day and it's going to sweep you away. And it's loving to tell people that. It's loving to be serious about sin, because it magnifies how glorious the gospel is, that Jesus is so against sin. He's so against sexual immorality, and including homosexuality. I know that people take it as their identity. I just think that's not true. And I think you've been lied to if you believe that. It's not your fundamental identity. And Jesus is vehemently against homosexuality. And yet he came and went through brutally bloody, horrible mockery, slander, and murder in order to die that you may not stay in that mire, that you may be released and liberated from it. And I think to deny people that wonderful contrast of the fact that God is so against sin, but he was so against it that he even came down and wanted to do something about it and took it upon himself. that's just, the gospel is just even more glorious. Whereas if you start chopping off the kind of things that Jesus had to die for, actually we're going to redefine sin. We're going to say you didn't need to do, God, you needn't have bothered forgiving me for that because it's not a sin. I've decided. My society's decided. That's just a terrible way to go. We've got examples throughout history, throughout the whole of Israel's history, for example, in the Old Testament, of where God's people think they've got it right. They think that they've seen things, that they think that they can go in this direction and it's fine, and it isn't. And God's judgment comes upon them. And I just want to tell those people, actually hear the gospel. The gospel is more powerful, more profound than you even realized.
Yeah. So, looking back, do you either regret that tweet? Do you regret the wording of that tweet? It has given you so much stress. I've been mini cancelled, and for just over a weekend thinking thousands of people thinking horrible thoughts about me, and that is not who I am. And so any regrets there?
Well, I mean, no, there aren't at all, because in hindsight, I can see God's providence in it, his plan in it. I think there were certainly many mornings where I've woken up going, oh gosh, did that really happen? Did I really tweet that? And thinking I was about to go to work. I've had at least 7 or 8 days where I've woken up and think, oh, I'm getting ready to go into work today. So, oh, there's that tweet. I don't have a job. And so that is hard. It's not, so I don't want to minimize that and pretend it's all easy and high and mighty, a hero of faith or something. But I think ultimately we need to stand by the courage of our convictions. And so that's what I have done. I believe that's what more Christians need to do. And I've been so encouraged to hear so many Christians contact me and say, wow, because of your stand, I'm doing this, or I've decided to do that, or I've decided to stop doing that. People who have been gay themselves, for example, have said, actually, I've decided to make a change in my life from it. So I've got lots of Christians saying, what a terrible thing you've done. You've isolated these gay people. They'll never become Christians now. They'll hate God because of you. That's what I get a lot of flack from Christians, similar to when you street preaching and Christians attack you for that. But then there are some non-Christians who can even get in touch and go, wow, thank you. It's nice to see someone stand by the conviction, even if sometimes they disagree. So I'm glad that I worded it that way, because it's how I believed it needed to be worded. I didn't do it foolishly or callously, and I didn't do it thoughtlessly. I believe that's exactly what is happening. I do believe it's invading the church, and I do believe we have to stand against it for the sake of the gospel.
We've lost true liberalism, haven't we? So Voltaire, who was no fan of religion and Christianity at all, but he said, I will die. I'll fight for the right of these people to express their opinion. And we've just reached a stage where freedom of speech is so threatened at every level, and we've got to give voice, within limited minimalization of parameters for people of conflicting views. It's just it's a nightmare age, isn't it, with social media and all that, for that to happen in a loving way. Because I know your heart is loving, and yet people just want to portray you as a bigot, as a hater, which is not what you are.
Yeah. And some of that's because it's needing to recover a combative stance as well, which I think a lot of Christians don't get. Like there's a lot of stuff in the New Testament of Jesus, the apostles, speaking a little bit more robustly, and we've just been used to being so winsome that we kind of go, let's just be really nice. And I think absolutely it's good to be loving and friendly and warm, but winsomeness in and of itself is not the only way to engage. So sometimes you do actually have to speak a bit more strongly, and that's hard. I have to die to that in myself. I like to be liked, and I think sometimes we need to be willing to say what might get you hated. And that just, Jesus promised us that would happen if we follow him. Not that you go out and seek hate by any means, but it will happen. And I think social media certainly is a bit of a cesspit for that in general.
So time's running out. I just want to hear that you are not, you got a wife, is it 5 children?
Yeah.
So you're sort of shafted, you're kicked out, you're cancelled. As a lecturer, a career lecturer, it looks like through any institution, that is gone. So you've got no money coming in. It's looking very, very bleak. But we both believe, I'm sure you stand on the promise of, for example, 1 Thessalonians 5:24, the one who calls you is faithful and he will do it. How has it turned out in the last few months?
Yeah, well, we've... amazingly, what happened is that, funnily enough, another prayer meeting after I'd been fired at my church, the same guy who gave me that envelope also had a kind of word for me that God was going to provide for me for 2 years, at least 2 years, and to enable me to do what I needed to do and walk into. And I was praying through that, and that really resonated with me, with what I wanted to do. I realized that a lot of these cancellation things within academia and within broader culture are happening for a reason, that and the Christians not willing to speak out about them is just not right. The kind of kowtowed by fear isn't right. And so something else needed to happen. And I feel like God's given me a vision to sort of rethink how we do theological education. And so I've come up with this phrase to be shamelessly biblical, that we're not just being apologetic about it, going, I'm so sorry that this is in the Bible. I guess I have to believe it because it's in the textbook. But really like going, this is good. This is God's wisdom. And this is good for the world. It's actually good for people. And we want to defend it and proclaim it and train Christians who are going to be able to fight the battles that are facing the church in the next generation. And so I don't entirely know what that's going to look like yet, but I'm kind of planning towards that. And in faith, that's kind of what I decided would have to happen. And so I put out a crowdfunder thinking, okay, I'll just get some funding to live for the next couple of years and we'll stay in our house, our flat where we were paying rent on. And I felt God really challenging me to ask for the amount of money that we really needed. And the day I was going to put the crowdfunder out, we got an eviction notice from our flat saying you need to leave. I was like, oh gosh, I thought we were about to have a 12-month renewal. And rather than a renewal of our tenancy, they said, we've changed our mind. We want to evict you. So you've got, a couple of months to get out. And so we realized, gosh, we need to go and find a new house. And Molly was just desperate. We homeschool our kids. It's really hard and unsettling to move. To go to another rental is going to be really hard. We'd love to be able to buy somewhere. We obviously can't get a mortgage now because we don't have a job. And so I don't know what to do. So I felt God say, well, just ask me. I dare you. He said, I really felt this from God. I dare you to ask me for what you need. And so I thought I need £200,000 really to live on and then to buy somewhere. We had some money that we just inherited from my mother passing away, but not enough to buy a house. And so we thought we'd have to buy a house outright, which seems mad. But I said, okay, Lord, I'll ask you in my heart. He said, no, I want you to ask outwardly. I was like, oh gosh, that's going to be so embarrassing because then I have to people are going to think I'm, monetizing the situation. It's so hard. He said, yeah, I know, you're going to have to die to that as well. So out it goes. I put it out there, get all sorts of horrible flack, as you'd imagine. But the crowdfunder brought in £50,000, which was amazing. And then a load of other random donations started coming in from people, including one guy who just emailed me one day, said, is there anything I can help with? And I said, well, you could just pray, we're trying looking for a house. He said, would an interest-free loan of £100,000 help? And I was like, yeah. It's like, wow, that is exactly what would help, actually. You've literally hit the nail on the head. And then when it turned out, when I asked him, when I said, we found a house, we need some kind of to show proof of funds, like, are you okay to actually send us some of the money? So it was this was like a few weeks later. It's like, this guy changed his mind? I don't even know him. And then it's just an email loan thing. And then he started sending me some of the money in chunks. And I said, now you've started sending me the money. Do I have to have something on paper? Do we need a solicitor involved? I don't know how loans like this work. And he said, we've decided, we're praying about it. My wife and I decided we're just going to give it to you as a gift.
Wow.
And it's like, wow. So I came off the phone to my wife. I was like, I think someone's just given us £100,000 out of nowhere. Yeah. And I just can't believe that that's happened. And so with that, and with all of the other donations that started coming in, we cleared just over £200,000. Not very long ago, actually. So I couldn't believe that God had actually answered the prayer. And maybe I shouldn't have not, but I knew he was going to provide, but you just kind of go, you want to make excuses for God and go, well, he was busy or whatever. He didn't need to give me everything. And I was like, this is exactly what he said. Ask me for what you want. And he gave it to me. And I know that doesn't happen all the time. I'm certainly not a prosperity preacher. I've just seen God provide in bizarre ways when you take a stand for him and step out in faith. He loves to bless in faith. And we feel very blessed by that. So it's been a really trying, hard time, but he's kind of set us up to be able to pursue this next kind of season well.
Oh, Aaron, there's more questions that I'd like to ask, but time has run out. But yes, it's a tough call, isn't it? Being true to your convictions, and I sort of salute you as someone who is willing to stand firm when in the shifting sands of culture. Which is a chance just to plug your podcast again, Pod of the Gaps, guys. If I was listening, I listen to about 4 podcasts a week. It is one of them. In fact, if I'd always been listening to Inspired or Pod of the Gaps, I'll probably go Pod of the Gaps because it's helpful to me in terms of engaging with culture. So do go for that if you wanted to listen to good stuff. Aaron, can people be in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can email me. My email is aaron.p.edwards@gmail.com. Or you can find me on Twitter, see me saying some things on Twitter that get me in trouble, or you can find me on my blog, my Substack, That Good Fight.
Okay, so we'll put that all in the blurb. And very interesting, very challenging, very stirring. I know some people will really not have appreciated the content, but listen, we need to speak the truth in love. We need to engage respectfully. We live in an age where if someone has a different opinion to us, words become violence. They are not violence. Ideas are really important to fight over and to discuss with grace and respect for the other opinion. And may you continue to do that winsomely, with wisdom, effectively. And just cheering you on. And Molly, who has also, taken a lot of hits in the battle as well, and your precious 5 children. All right, bro. Thanks for your time. Bless you, Aaron Edwards.
Amen. Cheers, bro. Thank you so much.
Guys, I think it's a sort of podcast that you will be forwarding to friends. I think it's important what we've discussed. So do that. If you want to give us a great review on Spotify or iTunes, I'd appreciate that. If you want to get in touch with me, simongilbert.com. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sandman for the mixing. Next week, we'll be back with a very different story and another wonderfully stimulating, inspiring, encouraging, challenging voice that will hopefully build you up and stir you to be all in your pursuit of Christ. All right, have a good week. Meantime, and toodaloo.